So I'd like to introduce Professor Greg Murray. Uh, Professor Murray has an international reputation for clinical psychology and is a top-ranked researcher worldwide in the fields of bipolar disorder, circadian rhythms, personality, and affect. He has published more than 200 articles, chapters, and books, primarily on the conceptualization, etiology, and psychological treatment of mood disorders. And this is a very interesting thing. I didn't realize this about you, Greg. After an initial career in music, he took his career from swim. Yes, and I was having a look at the wall lined with guitars there. We'll have to have a private chat about that some other time. I think I'd be very interested in that. You took out your PhD from the University of Melbourne in 2001 and have been a full professor at Swinburne since 2011. Professor Murray's work has had significant impact. He wrote the Australian Psychological Society's guidelines for the treatment of bipolar disorder and is an author of the influential Royal Australian New Zealand College of Psychiatrists Mood Disorders Guidelines. Professor Murray has played numerous leadership roles within and outside academia, including head of psychology and chair of Headspace Hawthorn. Current roles include director of Swinburne Centre for Mental Health, patron of Bipolar Life, a wonderful support organisation that if anybody is listening to this and does suffer from bipolar, they should be in contact with. Chair of Origin Youth Health Research Review Committee. He's also part, I'm very happy to say, and proud to say, part of the Scientific Advisory Committee at the Mental Health Foundation of Australia. So, Professor Murray, I welcome you most heartily today. It's always a pleasure to see you and your smiling face and manner. And I will let you go. I'll disappear from the scene. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Jim, and just thank you for that nice introduction. And it is a great pleasure to be working with you again and the Mental Health Foundation. It's a great organisation, and really I enjoy every time I have contact with your organisation. Jim, you should be very proud of what you've created and all the good work that you do for people with challenges with mental health. So thanks for inviting me to present today. And I think what we're going to do is I'll present the material pretty much straight through, and then there'll be time at the end for questions and answers, and we'll get you to use the Q&A function on the call to throw questions at me. If we were face to face, I'd have it as sort of more interactive as we're going. It's just a bit difficult to manage that through this Zoom sort of modality. So thanks very much. It's great to see that so many people have chosen to come along. I'm excited. And I'm also excited because I get to talk about one of my favourite topics. As Jim said, I've got a background in bipolar disorder, in working on psychological treatments for bipolar disorder, but I also have an interest in sleep and the body clock, and that's actually what my PhD was in way back in the days of horse-drawn carriages. And so this topic, which gets to bring together thinking about sleep in bipolar disorder and thinking about the management of sleep in bipolar disorder. I've been involved in these sorts of questions for a long time and delivering these sorts of interventions for patients, and also training clinicians in how to deliver these interventions. So yeah, for someone like me, it's a relief actually to be able to talk about this stuff and get it out of my head and out into the public. So what we're going to talk about today, just so you can see there that's a Van Gogh painting. And because I work in the field of bipolar disorders, I consider it fair game that I can take Van Gogh pictures and include them in my slides. Because some people think that Van Gogh warranted a diagnosis of bipolar disorder. So I'm going to take that and therefore say I can use his paintings in my slide set. Today's talk, we're going to cover four things. Firstly, we're going to characterise the sorts of sleep challenges that people with bipolar disorder self-report. And it turns out it's a very important part of the sort of clinical picture of bipolar disorder, the challenges of sleep. Then we're going to move on to the relationship between sleep and symptoms. And we're going to present some data that suggest that there actually might be a causal relationship between sleep and symptoms. So that's not just, sleep problems going with bipolar disorder. It's about unpacking it and saying, oh, actually, maybe sleep is involved in the development of some of the symptoms of bipolar disorder. So we want to be clear about that. And then the second half of today's talk, of course, we're going to focus on improving sleep in bipolar disorder. I'm going to present you with a kind of framework for thinking about what do we need to consider when we want to improve sleep in bipolar disorder. And then finally, we'll take that idea, the sort of framework, and bring it down to specific treatments for improving sleep in bipolar disorder. We'll introduce one evidence-based treatment, psychological behavioural treatment, but I'm also going to direct you to self-management resources that me and my colleagues in Canada have put together for self-managing sleep in bipolar disorder. And I suppose I'm very conscious of the fact that potentially many people on this call have bipolar disorder or know someone who has bipolar disorder. So I'm just very conscious that you've probably got a particular type of expertise on this question. So if I say anything that doesn't ring true to your experience or you disagree with, I really want to hear about it. So just because I'm saying it doesn't mean I'm committed to it, and I'm always open to being corrected or, people adding qualifications. So please, whenever I give this sort of talk, I end up learning probably more than the people I'm speaking to. So please, if the things don't ring true to you and your experience, jot them down and flick us a comment or a question once I've finished speaking. I'll be really very interested to hear about it. Okay, so what are the sleep challenges that people with bipolar disorder describe? So, firstly, what is sleep? I thought I should really probably start with a definition of that. This is a fancy scientific definition, but it's kind of interesting. A reversible state of unresponsiveness to the environment, right? So there are lots of states of unresponsiveness to the environment. You don't want to get in them because they're not reversible, like being dead, for example, or, significant problems with consciousness. You're unresponsive to the environment, but it's not reversible. We humans and many other animals, of course, have a daily pattern of sliding into this state of consciousness where the organism is unresponsive to the environment. It's very interesting when you think about it. It's a very high risk thing for an organism to do, isn't it? To put themselves in a state where they are not attending to the environment, right? And the reason I make that observation, like that's a kind of risky thing to do. That's what suggests that there's something very important about sleep, right? In terms of the well-being and the health of humans and other animals who sleep. It's costly to put yourself in a state where you're unresponsive to the environment. So there must be a significant benefit. And the benefits are what we all intuitively feel, there's quite a bit of science into this now that shows the ways in which the different stages of sleep perform different restorative functions. So, you might have heard of rapid eye movement sleep and non-rapid eye movement sleep, and you may have heard of slow wave sleep or deep sleep. There's a broad sort of pattern of findings here where the what's called non-rapid eye movement sleep, when our eyes aren't jumping around, rapid eye movement sleep when we tend to dream, you have our dreaming states. The non-rapid eye movement sleep is where the body is primarily focusing on restoration of the physical body. But rapid eye movement sleep is a very different state where the brain is very, very activated. In fact, if you look at the representation of brain activity during rapid eye movement sleep and during awake consciousness, it's kind of hard to tell the difference. The brain is very active during rapid eye movement sleep. And there is more recent thinking in psychology that suggests that rapid eye movement sleep is really important in terms of emotional functioning. So it seems that work gets done, emotional work gets done at the end of the day when we're sleeping, but we're in the REM, the rapid eye movement sleep stage. Emotional work is done to process the events of the day emotionally before the memories of the day are laid down into long-term memory storage. So there are different features of sleep that are doing different types of work for us. But in some, it's very clear that nature thinks this sleep thing is a really important thing to do. Second point that we need to keep in mind, so I've been talking about sleep as a general phenomenon for everybody. But then when we look at human beings, there are individual differences. There are important individual differences in sleep. So people differ in how much and when they prefer to sleep. So you've probably heard that the average adult prefers 8 hours, but if we were in a room together now, I'd be asking you to put up your hands and we'd get a range. The most, if I said, how many hours of sleep would you prefer to get? The most common response will be 8, but we'll get people who say 6 or even 5 and 11 and even 12. And they're not joking, that is actually their preference in terms of the total amount of sleep they would prefer to get, you know, if they had no restrictions on their behaviour. And then, of course, the other important variable that differentiates between people is when during the day we want to sleep. So some of us are owls and some of us are larks. So morning types versus evening types. Sorry, the owls are the evening types, the larks are the morning types. And this is a very interesting variable, this morningness versus eveningness. Again, it's very interesting that we're all very clear about that. And if we were in a room together, I'd be getting you to put up your hands about the preferred time that you would say go to bed if you had no restrictions on your activities. And that varies a lot between people. It also it varies between adults, but it also varies across development. And you may have noticed this, that if you're a teenager, you're probably finding it hard to get up and go to school. Parents of teenagers are very conscious of this, that their teenager seems to be making a very bad decision by still being up at 12 o'clock or 1 o'clock in the morning on a school night. And parents get a bit irritated with this, saying, no wonder you're tired and grumpy in the morning. You keep putting yourself to bed too late. But the reality is biology has changed on a teenager. And once we hit puberty, there is a phase delay and teenagers are just not ready to go to sleep. But they're not biologically ready to go to sleep at 10:30, which is the time they need to go to sleep if they're going to be awake for the school day the next day. It's a real problem, that it's sometimes called an epidemic of sleeplessness in adolescence, which is caused by the fact that the total duration of sleep that adolescents need doesn't decrease compared to primary school kids. It doesn't. It's the same. Roughly 9-10 hours is what they need. But they need it at a later time of day. And because school start times, if anything, get earlier than they were in primary school, we get this constriction of available sleep time for teenagers, which is a significant problem for many teenagers. And then the other thing that happens with development in terms of the timing of when we want to go to sleep, as we get older, we tend to become more morning types. So even if you were, through your 30s and 40s and 50s, was someone who was happy getting up at 7:30 in the morning, that'd be your ideal get up time. As you get older, that's going to get earlier on average. So it might be 6 that you're comfortable getting up. Older people start phase advance. Everything happens a bit earlier on average. Obviously, there are differences between people, and I'm talking about averages. Two other key points about the background of sleep before we get into the details of how this impacts on bipolar disorder. I've been talking a lot about sleep as if it's a purely biological process, and sometimes when we use that sort of biological language, we slip into thinking, oh, that means it's hardwired, nature built it, it's fixed, there's nothing you can do about it. That's not the case. So just because there's biological predispositions to sleep and biological processes that are involved, measurably involved in it, that doesn't at all mean that we humans can't control and adjust our sleep by changing our behavior, by changing our thoughts about sleep. So we still have degrees of freedom. We can still impact our sleep, even though I've been characterizing it largely, in terms of its underpinning biology. That doesn't mean we've got no power to change it. So in fact, better sleep habits can be learned, and through, the sorts of things we're going to talk about today, and consequently can have significant impact on people's quality of life. You can get better at sleep, just like you can get better at exercise, and you can tidy up your diet. And finally, just like exercise and diet, I just want to highlight, sometimes when we talk about sleep, and I'll mention in a second, some of the things that are difficult if we aren't sleeping well, right? Now, and again, it's easy to kind of take away a pessimistic message about that, I'd better sleep well, because if I don't sleep well, there's going to be these emotional consequences or these consequences for my cognition or behavior or something. But it's really important to remember that, like exercise and diet, we don't have to stress about one individual night's sleep, right? So if I want to have a healthy diet, it's my habits of eating that matter. I can eat McDonald's or KFC every so often, doesn't matter. But if I eat McDonald's and KFC every day, then I've got bad dietary habits. Same with exercise. I want to exercise pretty much every day, even if it's just a walk to go and get my coffee. But if I miss a day or miss 2 days, or I have a week where I'm feeling a bit flat, or the weather's crappy and I don't do it at all, doesn't matter. That's not our concern. It's the longer term habits of diet, exercise and sleep that determine the outcomes. And so when we're talking about, improving your sleep and the importance of good sleep, especially for people who are prone to mood problems, don't interpret that to mean you have to sleep really well every night. That is not what we mean. We mean develop good sleep habits, which over the long term will give you those benefits of good quality sleep. But don't put pressure on any given night's sleep, because of that might, that's just a one-off, just like your day of eating KFC. Okay, in the case of bipolar disorder, it's really important, of course, and many people on this call will know this, to realise that bipolar disorder is not just one thing. It's a complex condition with various faces. One of the faces is depression, right? One phase of the disorder is depression. And we have pretty strong data that when people with bipolar disorder are in that depressed phase or showing significant depressive symptoms, they all report insomnia. So difficulties getting to sleep, insomnia, difficulties getting to sleep, staying asleep, or waking up early, that's what insomnia is, are reported by everybody in this particular study, but just about everybody, let's say, for overall in the population. And the insomnia problems that are typically mentioned by people in the depressive phase of bipolar disorder are middle and late insomnia. That is, waking in the night and having trouble getting back to sleep, or late insomnia, which is waking too early in the morning and not being able to get back to sleep, like at 4 or 5 o'clock. It's a very common experience of people who are depressed. And then a large proportion of people in the depressed phase of bipolar disorder also report hypersomnia, that is, sleeping too much during the daytime, or feeling tired and the need to sleep in the daytime. So importantly, insomnia and hypersomnia can co-occur. So difficulties keeping that fully consolidated night of sleep, right? That's what insomnia refers to. difficulty getting asleep, staying asleep, or waking up too early. So that's what insomnia refers to. But hypersomnia refers to wanting to sleep outside that period of time when you'd prefer to be asleep. And so people with depression, people with bipolar disorder, when they're experiencing depression, commonly experience both those things. When people with bipolar disorder are in the elevated or excited or agitated states of mania and hypermania and mixed states, about a third of them meet criteria for insomnia. That is, they can't get to sleep, right? But interestingly, part of the definition of mania and hypermania is decreased need for sleep. That is, significant when someone is hypomanic or manic, they will also often report, well, I don't feel the need to sleep. I've got heaps of energy. It's 3 o'clock in the morning. I don't feel tired and I'm ready to keep going. But just because, and that's, as I say, part of the definition of mania and hypermania, that decreased need for sleep. But what's important in the research now is we've discovered that, yes, that is a phenomenon of mania and hypermania, but there is also a phenomenon where about a third of people say, I can get tired but wired. That is, I'm tired, but I can't get to sleep. So there's this tension between the system that kind of wants to keep you active and out there and hunting for rewards, but another part of you is conscious of the fact that I'm actually exhausted, that sort of tired but wired feeling. And then the other big finding that really encouraged a whole lot of work in this area by my colleague Alison Harvey from California was that even outside the mood episodes of bipolar disorder, so when people are euthymic, they sometimes call it, so the mood is not bad, it's a sort of normal mood, that's what euthymic means. So between the episodes, when functioning is often for many people with bipolar disorder pretty good, and sometimes it's completely normal and they're completely back to normal functioning. But during that inter-episode period, there's still significant sleep problems. And Alison and her group actually found in 2005, they just did a survey of people with bipolar disorder who were between episodes and asked them about their sleep and just characterised the different types of problems that they were talking about. And interestingly, they looked at all the different things. So, worry about sleep, dissatisfaction with sleep, symptoms of insomnia, tiredness in the daytime, those sorts of things, right? A sort of broad description of sleep. And the pattern they found of the sleep complaints, or things people were reporting, looked very much like the pattern of sleep problems that you get in a sample of people who are just turning up to a sleep clinic for diagnosed insomnia, right? So people with bipolar disorder between episodes are experiencing a heavy burden of sleep problems. It looks a lot like the extent of sleep problems or challenges or difficulties that we see in a sample of people whose primary problem is sleep, is insomnia, right? And that's why we've concluded in our research into quality of life in bipolar disorder that sleep is one of the main domains that really matters for people with bipolar disorder in terms of their quality of life. There's other domains like work, relationships, etc., but one of them is sleep. Oh, that's that point. So sleep is a core component of quality of life in bipolar disorder. Okay, so that's just the characterization of what's going on with sleep in bipolar disorder. Now let's look at this additional idea that there might be a causal relationship between sleep and symptoms. So one of the reasons, apart from the fact that sleep is a very important part of the quality of life of people with bipolar disorder, right? So everything I've already said, you would say, oh, well, we need to help people with bipolar disorder with their sleep. It's impacting their quality of life. They've really got a significant set of problems. There's an additional issue, and that is that sleep might be part of the pathway to the symptoms, the mood symptoms of bipolar disorder. This idea has been around for a long time, sorry. Just trying to move this so I can see that. Yeah, cool. A guy called Tom Weir from the United States put forward the hypothesis a long time ago, and there's been a huge amount of research and clinical practice based on this since Professor Weir put forward the idea that he noticed in his clinical work. He was a psychiatrist. He noticed in his clinical work that it's very rare for someone to become manic without missing a night's sleep, right? And so he came up with this phrase that sleep reduction is the final common pathway to mania. There's all sorts of causes of mania, but all of them funnel through disturbance of sleep. And since then, there's been a whole, a number of avenues looked at in terms of what that might mean. What might that relationship be about in bipolar disorder? And Alison and I, a long time ago, did a big review of all those different bits of evidence about why we think that there might be a causal link between sleep and circadian rhythms. Sorry, if people don't know the word circadian, I know it's not a common word. I'm sorry, I should have defined it before. We're talking there about the body clock. So it's a clock that's located deep in the brain, about 6 or 8 centimeters in from where I'm pointing. And it's a clock that drives the timing of sleep and activity, and the peak timing for different types of performance, whether it be motor performance or thinking. It's a clock that sits in humans, but it also sits in every other living being that we know of on the planet. And it's put there by Mother Nature, because Mother Nature worked out way back in evolutionary time that the Earth's environment changes dramatically twice a day, from dark to light and from light to dark. That is such a significant change in the environment that organisms can't afford to react to it. They have to predict it, right? Makes sense, doesn't it? Such a dramatic change in the environment from light to dark. So we actually live in 2 different environments, don't we? Every species that lives on the surface of the Earth actually inhabits 2 distinct environments. That is such a fundamental feature of our environment that it is a core feature of biology, all biology, not just humans. The system has stayed pretty much the same through evolutionary time. So my circadian clock is pretty much the same as Jim's, but it's also the same as my cat's, and it's pretty much the same as the roses that my partner plants in the front garden. Nature's just designed a clock and put it in every living being that we know of. Pretty much. There are some things deep down in the darkness of the ocean which we're not sure whether they have a clock like ours, but pretty much everything does. That's what we mean by the circadian system, the timing. And one of the core things that it times is the timing of sleep and activity. So Alison and I put together a whole summary of all the different bits of evidence about why this sleep and timing process might be important causally in bipolar disorder. And it's pretty clear-cut case. So for example, we see evidence, lots of different evidence, that for humans, if we are not sleeping well, and you'll know this, every human knows this, we get problems with emotion regulation, don't we? We are much more irritable if we're not sleeping well. The other thing that you may not be so conscious of, but keep an eye out and you will notice it, if we're not sleeping well, we're not just irritable, which we would call negative affect, that sort of narkiness. We're also low on positive affect, the desire to go out and do things. So if we're not sleeping well, not only are we irritable, but we also get what I call the can't be bothered. When someone says, why don't we go to a movie, or why don't we go for a walk, or why don't we play tennis, or I might say to myself, would you like to just catch up on that Netflix show you've been interested in? And the answer might be no if I'm not sleeping well, because we lose positive affect as well. So we don't just get an increase in negative affect when we're not sleeping well, the irritability, but we also get a decrease in positive affect, and we start to develop the can't be bothered. And of course, that's sounding a lot like depression, isn't it? Increased negative affect, disturbed sleep, decreased positive affect, that's sounding a lot like depression. And so overall, we get mood regulation problems on average, right? Not everyone is as sensitive to these disturbances as everyone else. So there's a range, but on average, humans do experience this. In bipolar disorder, just going to the next point, we also have evidence that disturbances of sleep actually predict onset of episodes within bipolar disorder. So we're talking about populations of people who have been diagnosed with bipolar disorder. And then the question is, well, what's their experience going to be like going forward? We call that the course of the disorder. Do they have a depressive episode, a manic episode, or no episodes? Disturbances of sleep predict the course in terms of relapses. And we also have evidence for changes in that body clock, the biological rhythm system, as a predictor of onset of the disorder, and also relapse within the, relapse into episodes once you have the diagnosis of bipolar disorder. And we're thinking there about things like change of season, time zone travel, shift work. They are life events which challenge the body clock. And we do see in people with serious mood disorders an increase in episodes when those things happen. And then finally, just an interesting point, some of the most prominent, in fact, the most prominent biological treatment for bipolar disorder, lithium, operates largely through body clock pathways. So lithium actually at the cellular level, one of its main pathways of operation that leads to its mood stabilizing effects in bipolar disorder is through stabilizing circadian rhythms. So at all these different levels, and that's why I call it a matrix of evidence, there's no single bit of evidence that could convince you of this, but there's kind of a web of evidence that convinces us that these sleep and circadian vulnerabilities are important for the mood outcomes of people with bipolar disorder. They're part of actually, so if we can manage the sleep and circadian vulnerabilities, let's simplify that, just say, let's talk about sleep. If we can manage the sleep vulnerabilities, we are actually doing something to manage the disorder, the symptoms of the disorder itself. So, what do we do? What we're aiming for is good quality sleep. And this is that framework I was talking to you about. There are 3 things we need to do to improve sleep. This is for everybody. And we just extend it across to bipolar disorder, and we'll give some tweaks to it. But basically, there are 3 elements that we can control through our behaviours and also to some extent our thoughts by challenging our unproductive thinking. There are 3 things we can focus on that will increase the likelihood that we sleep well. And the more we build these things into habits, the more we will successfully build good sleep habits. And as I said before, it's the good sleep habits we care about. None of these things really, if you're on any given night, right? So, say tonight, you've been sleeping well for years, but say tonight it's 1 o'clock in the morning and for whatever reason, you're not going to sleep. None of these three things is really going to create a good night's sleep for you immediately, acutely, right? They're not like a sleeping pill. It's not like a silver bullet. These are all behaviours the effects of which build up over time, right? So it's about building habits in these 3 areas. None of them will solve the problem of tonight's sleep for you, right? But you can learn skills such that if that happened in 3 months' time, you would actually be better able to deal with the challenge of a night where it's too hot or the mozzies are too intense and it's kind of hard to get to sleep, right? Or you have worries, it's kind of hard to get to sleep. And there are three things. I'm just going to quickly mention them now because we're going to cycle back to them. This is just the overview. Let's start with low bedtime arousal. One of the main things that can disturb people's sleep is that they are activated at bedtime. That activation can be negative, like anxiety or worry, but it can also be positive, like excitement, right? And obviously, if we're thinking about bipolar disorder, it's that excitement or agitation even that might be the main barrier to sleep in terms of arousal. So we need to create circumstances where we decrease arousal at bedtime. And essentially what we're going to do about that, we'll talk more about it in a second, but just to flag it, we're going to train the body up to expect calmness at bedtime and to be able to know when bedtime is coming. So we're going to treat ourselves like a Labrador. We're going to treat ourselves, actually, I'll give you a better example. We've got a cat, Jimmy, who's getting a bit old. And so he meows a lot, and sometimes we can't work out why he's meowing. He's getting on in years. I actually think he's in his prime, but other members of my family think he's getting a bit on. And so the last couple of nights, he's decided that he's going to meow at the front door where the bedrooms are, because he gets a better response at 1 o'clock in the morning, because he's allowed out at night because he can't wander very far because of where our fences are. And he's trying to get us to get up in the middle of the night and let him in the front door, as opposed to coming in the window, which is what he's meant to do. Now, of course, we have to not respond to that, right? Because otherwise we'll never get a good night's sleep again. So like training Jimmy not to cry at the front window in the middle of the night, we can train our bodies to expect bedtime and expect a calming that's going to happen in the evening, every evening pretty much. So that involves making decisions about having a wind down time in the evening to prepare us for sleep, and also a time where we commit to not trying to problem solve, issues that are going on in our life, either in our heads or in our relationships, or, difficult problems at work that aren't easily knocked off with, quickly. We commit to not doing that once the sun's gone down, essentially. And instead, we build in relaxing, soothing activities that over time, and we're talking, days, weeks, and even months, the body starts to learn, like Jimmy in the front door, the body starts to learn, oh, that's what happens in the evening. In the evening, we calm down and we don't bring worries into the bedroom. We don't bring excitement into the bedroom. We bracket things off. We will talk more about how that works in bipolar disorder in a minute. So that's low bedtime arousal. The other thing, strong sleep drive, that refers to the fact that one determinant of whether we're going to go to sleep or not surprisingly, this is completely common sense, is how long we've been awake, right? This is the common sense idea of what makes us sleep. The longer you've been awake, the more ready you are to go to sleep, obviously, right? Common sense. So if I got up at 6 o'clock this morning, by midnight tonight, I've been up for a long time and I'm going to be ready to sleep in terms of sleep drive, right? But similarly, say I got up at 6 this morning, I go to bed at 10 tonight or 11. If I wake up for some reason or other, say Jimmy wakes me up at 4 o'clock in the morning, I've already had 5 or 6 hours sleep. It's going to be kind of hard for me to get back to sleep because my sleep drive has decreased, right? I've had some sleep. And so this is one of the reasons why if we are woken up in the night, it can be frustrating trying to get back to sleep because we've actually got pretty low sleep drive because we've already just recently had a chunk of sleep. right? So in terms of improving our sleep, one of the key things we need to think about is minimizing, say, naps in the daytime, because they decrease sleep drive. Or if for some reason or other you really have to nap, we want that napping to happen earlier in the day. We don't want it happening at 5 or 6 p.m. because that really is going to make it very difficult for you to get to sleep by 10, 11 p.m. because your sleep drive has dropped. Think of sleep drive like hunger, right? The longer since I've eaten, the hungrier I am. The longer since I've slept, the more ready I am to sleep. Common sense. That third part, the regular daily rhythms, is something that's not so common sense. You know, I think the general public isn't so aware of it, but it's really important. So remember I was telling you about the body clock, and I said the job of one of the primary jobs of the body clock is to put us to sleep and wake us up in the morning. That's one of the things nature has it for. So it is the case that even if we've been up for a really long time, so we've got a strong sleep drive, if our body clock says this isn't sleep time, you won't go to sleep. And you think, what's an example of when that would happen? And of course, it's time zone travel, right? So if I fly to New York, I might be up for hours and hours and hours. It feels like I've been up forever, didn't get any sleep on the plane, and it's been a hassle of a day, and I've been through security, and it's been really tedious. And I finally get to the hotel in New York, and it's 1 o'clock in the morning, and I think I'm going to have the best night's sleep of my life. Nope, because my body clock is still on Melbourne time, and I will not sleep. I might even feel hungry. I'll feel completely awake. That's the only time we notice, us humans, that there's another factor involved in getting to sleep apart from tiredness, apart from sleep drive. Jet lag is one of the few times we notice how important it is to sleep at the right time for us. It's not just the amount of energy we've expended in the daytime, it's also sleeping at the right time. And then I'm going to add one more idea to this. Remember I said the body clock is pervasive, it's in all through biology, and one of its major jobs is to time us in and out of sleep. The body clock is a very interesting system in that it is a genuine clock. It ticks away through genetic action, but it is adjusted every day to make sure it's still in sync with dark and light, the changes in sunlight and darkness in the environment. It's adjusted every day, largely through light information through the eyes, right? You think, well, why is he telling me this? The reason I'm telling you that is the body clock actually benefits. We can make our body clock, make the rhythm of our body clock stronger if we lead a daily life that is more predictable and routine, right? So the body clock, which is a biological process deep inside the brain, is open to the environment because it wants to check that it's still synchronized with light and dark. And humans can either support or interfere with that process. If your lifestyle is very erratic, some days you get up at 11 a.m., some days you get up at 5 a.m., some days you have a big long sleep in the afternoon, some days you eat lunch at 3 p.m., other days you eat lunch at 10 a.m., some days you're socializing with people at breakfast, other days you don't speak to anyone until 7 o'clock at night. If you have a very irregular lifestyle, that's a bit challenging for the body clock because it's getting mixed messages about your activity and how your activity is going in the environment. On the other hand, if your lifestyle is very routine and predictable, you tend to get up at about the same time each day, 7 days a week. You tend to go to bed at about the same time, 7 days a week. You tend to exercise at about the same time. You see the sun at about the same time. And when by about, I mean within, say, 45 minutes, an hour. So if you've got that sort of clockwork routine across days, then that benefits your clock. And it means that the clock sends out a stronger pulse of, hey, it's bedtime. hey, it's wake time. And so it's kind of, we sometimes call these regular daily rhythms of behavior, we call them scaffolding for the clock. They kind of help the biological clock do its job. And we think that people with bipolar disorder particularly need that, because we think their clock is prone to being a bit unstable. And so those behavioral things of daily routine, where we're pretty predictable from one day to the next, tend to support the clock and therefore help it in its job of helping us get to sleep. So, take-home messages about supporting the biological clock that sits deep in the brain. Regularize your wake time and bedtime across 7 days of the week. Try and get sunlight close to waking. And so for most of the people with bipolar disorder that I work with and speak to in forums like this, we're talking about a walk around the block. That's all you need in terms of sunlight exposure, pretty much upon waking. So if you can, that might be even before breakfast. Now, sorry, something else I've got to say. In terms of this regularizing of wake time, and it does turn out there's some evidence that it's the wake time that it's most important to keep regular. We always talk about wake time and bedtime. They're both important, but there's some particular quality about wake time, and that might be something about the body clock being particularly sensitive to information in the morning. That's when it wants to get synchronized. So you might be asking, well, what time? You know, a lot of people with problems with their mood are late risers. So they may not be getting up till 10, 11, 12, maybe even after 12. When I say regularize your wake time, you need to think about a wake time that you can actually sustain, right? So I'm not saying everyone becomes, you know, morning types and sets their alarm for 7. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying choose a time that is sustainable for you and stick to it. It's the regularity of that time rather than the earliness of it that matters. Now, of course, if you're working or going to school, you may need to have an earlier time. And so we might need to think about the challenge of that as well. But it's the regularity of the time that matters most for what we're talking about now. And then you get your sunlight close to waking. And regularize, that is, make them at the same time each day. Important things that the body takes notice of, like exercise, meals, it really is interested in when food comes into the system, and even socializing. The organism notices when we're talking to people. It notices socializing. And then there's a broad principle as well, that the clock likes a clear distinction between day and night, right? So activity, simply getting active and getting out in the daytime is really important, because, but remember, you know, basically what we're trying to create in ourselves to strengthen sleep from this clock viewpoint, we're trying to create a really strong contrast between daytime and nighttime. We're trying to make that contrast as strong as possible. And so that means activity, socializing, things you're interested in, getting stuff done, crossing things off the list, being active in the daytime, calming down once the sun starts to go down, and preparing to withdraw into sleep, right? Remember, that's what we started out with saying. Sleep's this unusual state where humans withdraw from the world, and we facilitate that by having a strong contrast between daytime activity and what's going on at night. And as we all know, if we've ever had depression, that's what happens. We get a blurring. We're tired and inactive in the daytime, and we're unsettled at night. It's that strong contrast that we're after, and that helps the biological clock do its job of priming us for sleep. In terms of strengthening the sleep drive, as I mentioned, we want you to avoid napping as much as possible. Some people can't make it through the day without napping. But, you know, there might be some problem solving that we need to do around that. And you might do that with your psychologist or people in your support group, like the Bipolar Life support group we were talking about before. And then, of course, the common sense stuff, which falls under the heading of what we call sleep hygiene, avoiding caffeine, nicotine, and other stimulants as much as possible. Oh, you know, we're talking about this regular arise time. People who are sleeping badly, they have a habit that can maintain their sleep problem. And that habit is, if they didn't get much sleep overnight, they tend to stay in bed more in the daytime, right? So, you know, I didn't sleep. I was up and down all night and I couldn't get to sleep. And then a big chunk in the middle of the night, I was awake. So I finally got to sleep at 6 o'clock in the morning. I'm tempted to stay in bed till midday. A better approach is to say, no, it doesn't matter how much I slept last night. My wake time remains the same. Yeah. Remember, we said right at the start, a bad night's sleep's not going to kill you. It doesn't matter. What matters more is the routine. What matters more is the habit. And as we were saying, people differ in when they're ready to sleep. Depends on just the personality type of morningness, eveningness. It depends on development. We do know that people with mood disorders tend to be more evening types on average. And so when you're picking a time to stick to, take that into account. Be mindful of who you are in terms of your sleeping preference. And in terms of this decreased arousal at bedtime, I'm just going to say a couple of things about that. So the evening is a really important time. And I hope you're noticing that we're talking about improving sleep, but we haven't even mentioned bed yet, right? So we're doing all the preparatory stuff, all the setup stuff. It actually turns out that how active you are in the daytime is one of the strongest determinants of how well you're going to sleep at night. I think sometimes when we think of sleep problems in insomnia, the image that comes to our mind is in bed, not sleeping. But to solve that problem, to move towards better quality sleep, actually, we have to change our attention to before we're in bed. Once we're in bed and not sleeping, it's actually very little we can do. We just kind of give up on sleep on that night and maybe read a book or listen to the radio or whatever, listen to a podcast. Not much we can do. What we can do is build habits pre-sleep. And we're now talking about the evening time, which is a really important time in terms of that training the body to prepare for sleep. And that involves avoiding stimulation at night. So that can be things like heated discussions with your spouse. It can be things like, or your partner. It can be things like work, like checking work emails. It can be the news, which might get you upset about things. It can also be bright light. And so one of the things, you know, I'm sure everyone can guess this from what we've been saying so far, we want the body clock to think it's dark, and we don't want the body clock to get confused about that. So that means avoiding screens, like especially computer screens, like this one I'm looking at now, phone screens, in the evening because of the quality of light. It tends to be blue spectrum light that they tend to give off unless you have a filter on them. So we want to minimize that. And a lot of people benefit from literally turning down the lights in their house in the evening as part of cueing the body towards sleepiness. Now, one of the challenges, and I'm very conscious of this as I'm speaking to a group of people who, some of whom may have bipolar disorder, which is a condition that we associate with creativity and eveningness. A lot of people with bipolar disorder say, actually, but I do most of my best work in the evening. You know, I get started on something, it takes me a long time to get started in the daytime, but I finally get going at 8 o'clock at night and start working on that song or that drawing or that novel that I've been working on for the last 3 years. And I get going and I don't want to stop. And then we need to have a sort of discussion about the pros and cons of that. And essentially, a couple of my friends who have bipolar disorder, who I work closely with, who are in the creative profession, say, at some point, most people learn that if it's a good idea at 10 o'clock at night, it's still a good idea at 10 o'clock the next morning, right? So you just postpone it. It can wait. So if you won't forget it, maybe you want to jot down some notes to yourself to make sure, to give yourself confidence so you won't forget this good idea. But it's like what I sometimes call the elves and the shoemaker. You know, in the elves and the shoemaker, he gets the shoes ready, but he doesn't finish the job. He cuts out the leather, but he doesn't put them together. And overnight, the elves come and finish it. It's kind of the way we want people to think about if they're energized in the evening. Just start it. You can start it, but you don't have to finish it. And in fact, it may be easier to finish in the morning. That's the message that I take from the elves and the shoemaker. Anxiety, of course, which is a common cause of poor sleep, needs to be managed, and it needs to be managed before we're in bed, right? So if you are prone to worry or prone to anxiety or have a trauma background, it's really important that you look after that tendency before you're in bed. Again, you know, this isn't a silver bullet. These are habits that we want you to develop, which over time will tend to serve you well. It's not a silver bullet. There's no, you know, simple problem-solving exercise you can do at 4 o'clock in the afternoon and never worry again. That's not going to work. But you can train yourself to do, you know, if you're carrying worries about whatever it is, that you commit to finishing your exploration of those, your consideration of those before the evening starts. So, you know, the rough rule of thumb is once the sun has gone down, problem solving will not work and will turn into worry. Problem solving, just, you know, there's a technical term we use in psychology, which means there's something wrong in your life and you try and nut out what you're going to do about it. We all have those things, but many of us, me included, are prone to actually turning that into worrying rather than problem solving. So worrying is where we focus on the worst possible outcome of something and ruminate about it. That's the opposite of problem solving. Problem solving is where you identify a problem and you brainstorm solutions, you take action, etc., etc. It just so happens that for us human beings, it's really hard to stick to problem solving once the sun has gone down, right? We will slide into worry and we won't notice that we've done it, and we'll just be looping around the worst possible outcome of this situation, whatever it is. Yeah. And for some of us, that involves active relaxation, meditation, quiet exercise, etc. But it can also involve mindfulness. It can also involve distraction, like watching The Crown or whatever your favorite Netflix show is. Just nothing wrong with distraction as a way of relaxing you. Just keeping in mind, active relaxation can be challenging for some people, particularly people with a trauma background. So we're not expecting everyone that relaxation is a simple solution for everyone. And then finally, we're going to talk about bed. So finally, we want to make sure that bed is associated with rest and relaxation. There's a couple of things we want to do. We want to make sure that the bedroom is quiet, dark, and you're not contactable. So the phone is not in the room. And it's cool. We tend to sleep better in a cool than a heated room. And we want to keep bed just for sleep. And if sex is something that's relaxing for you and associated with, you know, calm and comfort, then sex as well, but nothing else. So on average, if we put more things into the bed, like eating Uber Eats or, you know, watching our favorite Netflix show in bed, we are starting to lose the link between bed and withdrawal into sleep, right? Bed is becoming, there's no marker for when are we meant to sleep. I hope that makes sense to you. In terms of there are two other rules, and these ones we need to be, that are general rules for improving sleep for everybody. But these are the two that we need to be a bit careful about for people with bipolar disorder. If someone has insomnia and they don't have a mood disorder, we can get pretty aggressive with their sleep. And one of the aggressive things we can do with sleep is only go to bed when we are in fact ready to sleep. So we actually stay up. You know, if it's 11 o'clock at night and you're not feeling sleepy, you might be feeling like a bit physically tired, or you're not much interested in what's going on, but you're not actually yawning, you're not showing the signs of being ready to sleep, you stay up. And in fact, an extreme version of that in the treatment of insomnia is, just so you know, is one of the strategies that works very well, it's very powerful, is you say to the person with insomnia, so how many hours a night are you sleeping? And they say, 3 or 4. And we say, okay, that's how long you're in bed. The rest of the time you stay up, and then you progressively increase it. It increases sleep drive and it reassociates bed with sleep, right? Now, the problem is if you have bipolar disorder or a serious mood disorder, any sleep deprivation could be a risk factor for triggering relapse. So that instruction that we really keep you out of bed until you're completely ready to sleep, we need to be a bit careful about that one, because it could be manicogenic, basically. And the same with the next one. A general rule for people who don't have a serious mood disorder, if we're managing their sleep, is we say, if you wake up in the night, get up, do something calming, and when you feel sleepy again, go back to bed. Now, we have to be careful with that recommendation with bipolar disorder, because again, we might kind of hit the activation button by doing that, and we don't want that to happen. So I'm kind of putting these last two bits of advice in sort of talking marks, just to flag that they are potentially a problem for people with bipolar disorder. So that's just an overview, and I'm almost done. So just to finish, what would you do if you found this talk interesting? You thought, there's some good ideas there. How would you start to make those changes? Two ways. One is you could seek out any psychologist pretty much and ask them for cognitive behavioural therapy for insomnia tailored for bipolar disorder, right? So cognitive behavioural therapy for insomnia has been investigated by Alison Harvey and her group and found safe and effective in bipolar disorder, with a couple of tweaks like those things that I just mentioned and a couple of additional features. But any reasonable psychologist who says they do CBT, and especially people who say they have an interest in bipolar disorder, will be able to roll this out for you. And I'm happy for them to contact me, because me and my PhD student have just written a summary of all this stuff for clinicians if they want a bit of an update. And they're those cautions that I was mentioning about sleep restriction and what's called stimulus control. And as I said right at the start, Alison Harvey's investigation of cognitive behavioural therapy for insomnia for a bipolar disorder found out that the most powerful part of the treatment might be the stabilisation of sleep and wake time. So we may not need those risky components, right? It's that stabilisation of sleep and wake that seems to be most powerful. So that's strategy one. If you wanted to do this sort of stuff for yourself, seek out a psychologist, they'll lead you through it. But I also direct you to what's called the Bipolar Wellness Centre on the web, which my colleagues in Canada and I put together. And one of the domains is about improving your own sleep using these principles. So it's self-management. So if you want to find out a bit more about it, hop on the Crest BD Bipolar Wellness Centre, and everything there will align with what I've said today. But then you might want to take the next step of going through a structured program with a psychologist who would, of course, tailor it to you. A few times today I've said, well, that depends. You might need to tweak this. It does help if you've got a significant challenge in this space to have another human being to nut out the challenges with, rather than trying to do it entirely on your own. So, in summary, challenges with sleep are common in bipolar disorder. If you've got bipolar disorder and you have issues with your sleep, you're not alone. 3 drivers of sleep are under our control, at least partly. There's things we can do to improve them: arousal at bedtime, sleep drive, and daily routines. And there is a structured intervention, a BD modified CBT for insomnia, and you can pursue that as self-management. But obviously, you know, a more detailed way of doing it would be with another human being, a professional trained in delivering that sort of stuff. So that's all from me. I realise I've been speaking for more than an hour, so I apologise for that. Any questions or comments? There's some in the Q&A. Let me see if I can open this up. Great, thank you, Katrina, Christina, Anonymous, Kim, and Anonymous. Thank you very much for these. So I'm just going to read them out. Any advice for someone who falls asleep easily but wakes up every 90 minutes and then is wide awake but feels like can't get back to sleep if they don't have something to eat, so ends up eating 3 to 4 times a night? Thank you, Katrina, for that. I would probably need to know more about you to have any sort of useful, even next questions to ask you. I'm sorry. It's nothing sort of generic comes to my mind immediately, but I'm sure if we spoke further about that, we'd come up with some hypotheses about what might be going on. One of the things I would be thinking about is your diet during the daytime and whether the things you're eating during the daytime have are foods that are processed relatively slowly so that you're getting through the night without being hungry. It is possible that that hunger is actually waking you up or is part of the waking up process. But that's just an idea off the top of my head, and it may ring bells with you or not. But no, I must say, Katrina, no general idea comes to my mind. The 90 minutes is very familiar because that's the typical sleep cycle. We go through multiple 90-minute cycles of sleep throughout the night. And in fact, all of us come back almost to awakeness roughly every 90 minutes. The thing is, good sleepers don't notice. So they actually do wake up every 90 minutes. So we go through deep sleep, light sleep, and little moments of wakefulness. Once people have a sleep problem or something that can pull them into more full wakefulness, like potentially hunger, then they stay awake. But in fact, that 90-minute looping, we all do. It only becomes an issue if we step into sort of full wakefulness at those 90-minute points. And it's possible that hunger is part of that for you, but I'm not clear on that. I'm sorry. Christina, what about diet and about what we eat before we sleep? Yes, of course. Great question, Christina. And Katrina, that was a great question too. I'm sorry, I just don't have a great answer. Christina, yes, so we should be avoiding high energy foods anytime later in the day. So sugars and caffeine, of course, for most people disturb sleep. Not everyone, but some people can have a double shot and go straight to sleep. But on average, the general rule for human beings is less caffeine, less sugar, especially in the evening. Carbohydrate-rich foods can help some people go to sleep. Milk products can help some people go to sleep, and that's what some of those over-the-counter sleep medicines have. So not sleeping pills, but the over-the-counter stuff often have sort of lactose milk type content because that helps people go to sleep. melatonin, Christina has another question. I was just about to mention melatonin. I'm a huge fan of melatonin, and I think it's very unfortunate that we don't have it in the supermarket like they do in many other countries in the world. So melatonin has two functions. It's like a darkness cue for the body clock, because melatonin is secreted in the brain when it's dark. But when you take a melatonin pill, it's kind of a double boost of information for the body clock that it's nighttime. So people take melatonin 90 minutes, 2 hours before they want to go to sleep. It's not going to put you to sleep, but what it does over multiple days is it's more like that daily routine idea. It makes a clear marker for people about when the nighttime is there. That's what melatonin does. Melatonin is also a little bit sleep-inducing. Soporific is the scientific word. A little bit sleep-inducing, kind of like a cup of hot milk. But for some people, that's enough to help them, and they associate it with sleep. They associate taking melatonin with going to sleep. So it can be part of a useful daily routine that helps you go to sleep. So thanks for that second question, Christina. Can we get a copy of the presentation? Yes, definitely. We'll make sure that you can get that through the Mental Health Foundation. Kim, will this recording be emailed to you? Watch it again as I missed the start. Is it being recorded? Yes, it is. So I presume you can, yes, I presume Mental Health Foundation of Australia will have this available as a recording. And yeah, the slides will get you. Yes, so Nina asked, can a severe case of jet lag actually trigger an initial BD episode? Theoretically, it can. I haven't heard of an actual example of it triggering a first episode. And of course, that can be a bit confounded, can't it? Because say if someone was a bit manic, one of the things they might do is get excited and say, I'm going to Los Angeles, right? So there could have been, the jet lag could have been a consequence of a manic episode on the way. So a bit difficult to disentangle what happened first sometimes. But yes, theoretically, any significant challenge to sleep and the body clock could be part of a first manic episode that gives you the diagnosis of bipolar disorder. So now we've got a few more questions, which is great. And so I'm just going down. Rebecca. How does, Rebecca, thanks Nina for that question. Rebecca, thank you for your question. How does sleep medication affect sleep disturbance, especially in initial onset manic depressive episode? So sleep medications are used in manic episodes. I'm not a psychiatrist and I'm not an expert on medication. So whenever I talk about prescription medications, I feel nervous, and I'm going to qualify it by saying I could be wrong. So I'm talking sort of from my anecdotal experience of hanging around with psychiatrists and having contact with patients. So don't quote me on anything I say about medication. But my understanding is that for manic episodes, apart from the sort of mood stabilizing and antipsychotic medications we might use, specific sleeping medications may also be prescribed, and they're part of that calming that we want to do, which the antipsychotics do as well, of course. Antipsychotics help people sleep. They are effectively sleeping medications as well. But my understanding is sometimes people are also given sleeping meds, particularly just to calm down that hyperarousal of a first manic episode. Yes, sleeping medications are sometimes used carefully in depressive episodes as well. We do need to be careful of sleeping medications, right? So we try and avoid long-term use of sleeping medication as much as possible. You know, obviously all of today's talk has been about behaviours that you can do to improve your sleep. And for most people, outside bipolar disorder, for most people with sleeping problems, it is the behavioural interventions that are first line, like they're the best go-to treatment for sleeping problems, with medications being used much more rarely and used in just short duration. And the same principles apply to bipolar disorder as well. We would prefer people to be learning good sleep habits rather than learning the habit of using sleeping medication. So thanks for that, Rebecca. Danielle says, what of melatonin manipulation? I'm not sure what that means, Danielle. We've already said that melatonin is a useful intervention for many people. It's been shown safe for long-term use. I'm not aware of any interactions between melatonin and any of the drugs that are commonly prescribed for bipolar disorder. But again, I'm not an expert on medications. And if you had any if you are on medications for bipolar disorder, taking any new medications, even if it's over the counter or melatonin, you should be telling your prescriber about that, because there can be rare interactions with anything if you're taking medication for your bipolar disorder. Ramila, adolescents usually have a lot of issues. Any special instructions apart from the sleep hygiene module you gave? Thank you very much. Thank you, Ramila. From India. Cool. You're in India. That's exciting. When we're talking about adolescents and their sleep, there's the sleep hygiene stuff. And remember we said that adolescents their biology changes and they're predisposed to sleeping later in the evening. The challenge for adolescents is to kind of, as much as possible, fight that tendency to sleep later and not reinforce it, right? So biology has shifted. So on average, they're no longer ready to go to bed at 10 and they're more ready to go to bed at 11:30 or 12, right? But their behaviours can magnify that delay. So that's where we start to talk about things like disconnecting from social media in the evening, because of course that's so seductive for adolescents. That's where life is happening, is social media. And of course, doing that in a way that is not provocative, right? One of the things I give talks to adolescents, to school groups, about improving adolescent sleep. And of course, a major theme in that sort of area is that parents and adolescents can get into conflict around this. So if you've got children who are adolescent and you're worried about this problem of decreased sleep because they're going to bed too late and then they have to get up for school, it's really important that it's not discussed in kind of a punishing way. You know, if only you did this, everything would be all right. And, you know, your silly friends are keeping your, you know, obviously we need to put ourselves in the shoes of the adolescent. And why are they doing what they're doing? One of the reasons they're going to bed late is because their biology has changed. Another reason they're going to bed late is their social world has gone through the roof and it's all happening on social media. It makes perfect sense for them to be attracted to, you know, being on Snapchat or whatever the current one is late in the evening. But there's a cost to it, to doing that. Now, if the parents can have that discussion with them, good, but quite possibly the parents are not in a position to have that discussion, and they may need to hand that discussion over to someone else. Now, I'm conscious of the time, I'm sorry, and I'm conscious, in fact, that I was meant to be in another meeting 20 minutes ago, and I've only just looked at this. What I'm going to do is, if we can keep this open, I can come back on here at 5 o'clock and type answers to the remaining questions. And I'm going to have to do that, I'm sorry, because we've got 30 questions and I would love to keep talking, but I've just remembered I actually have an appointment that started at 4 o'clock. because I booked this in for 1 hour. So I'm going to have to wind it up there, I'm afraid. But Jim, if you're still there, can we leave this open so that I can come back on? Is that possible?
Hello, Greg.
Hi, Jim. Can we leave this session open so I can come back on after the meeting I'm meant to be in now and answer some of these questions just by typing?
We will do our best to make sure that that can happen, Greg.
Okay.
I hope. And Nitya, is that possible? Are you there?
I'll email him all the questions and he can send us answers and we can put that on the website.
Perfect. That's even better.
That's easier.
That's even better. And you heard that some people want this video to be on your website and the slides. Can we make that happen?
Yes, it will be on our website and even in Facebook.
Great, great. I'm sorry about the tight wind up, but I've just remembered someone is waiting for me.
All right, Greg. Look, I won't keep you long by what would I say, by going through all our usual gratitudes to you. But thank you so much. I mean, it's amazing. We had over 225 people viewing from interstate and overseas, and we've got 30 questions and growing. So obviously you've made a profound impact, and I thank you so much as ever. For what you've done, for your generous donation of time and expertise. I won't hold you up anymore because I know you've got a meeting to go to, and I just send my regards to Jimmy in his prime, and take care and look after yourself. Thank you so much for what you've done today.
And thank you everyone for coming on board. It's been great fun speaking to you.
Yes, thank you. Thank you to everybody. It's been marvellous. Thank you so much for being part of this wonderful webinar.
Yeah.
And we'll see you at the next one.
Yeah. Looking forward to it. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.